The city lights of New York City blurred into a watercolor of gold and crimson as our limousine cut through the evening traffic. I traced the intricate embroidery on my wedding gown, a masterpiece of silk and lace that had cost more than my entire childhood. Michael sat beside me, his hand warm and steady on mine. He was perfect, charming, handsome, and oblivious to the elaborate deception I had orchestrated. His family, the Harringtons, had welcomed me with open arms, their warmth a stark contrast to the cold indifference I had known my whole life. I smiled at Michael, a genuine smile mixed with a silent lie. The prenuptial agreement, supposedly a formality to protect their vast fortune, sat in a secure file, its forged clauses waiting to be activated. The real document, the one that would grant me access to $8 million, was in a separate vault, a secret just for me. My mind raced back to my childhood in the shadow of their wealth, watching their world from afar. A world where doors were always open and opportunities were abundant. My world was one of locked doors and empty promises. That bitter memory fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about money. It was about evening the score. We arrived at the reception hall, a grand ballroom adorned with chandeliers that sparkled like 1,000,000 stolen stars. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington greeted us at the entrance, their smiles radiating pure joy. "Welcome to the family, Sarah," Mrs. Harrington whispered, pulling me into a hug so genuine it almost made my carefully constructed armor crack. Almost. The scent of her expensive perfume filled my senses, a reminder of the life I was stealing. As Michael and I took our first dance, his hand on my waist, his eyes full of adoration, a fleeting pang of guilt pricked at my conscience. But I pushed it away, replacing it with the cold, hard logic of my plan. This dance was a performance. This love was a transaction. Every gaze, every touch, every word was a carefully calculated step towards my $8 million prize. The applause of the guests was deafening, a chorus of congratulations for a future built on a lie. Hey there. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to catch the next part of Sarah's journey and more incredible stories like this one. The first few months of marriage were a blur of charity galas, exclusive dinners, and weekend getaways. The Harrington estate in Connecticut was a world unto itself. Rolling lawns, a private lake, and a staff that catered to every whim. I played my part flawlessly, the perfect wife, the doting daughter-in-law. I learned their routines, their habits, their little eccentricities. Michael, in his naive devotion, shared everything with me. His trust a weight I carried with a mix of triumph and unease. One rainy afternoon, I found Mrs. Harrington in the garden, tending to her prized roses. She saw me approaching and gestured for me to join her under the canopy. "They're a lot of work," she said, her voice soft. "But they're worth it. Just like family." She looked at me, her eyes kind and knowing. "Michael has never been happier, Sarah. You've brought so much light into his life." A lump formed in my throat. I smiled, but it was a brittle thing, a mask I was starting to hate. Michael's father, Mr. Harrington, was a man of quiet strength. He often took me on tours of his art collection, sharing stories about each piece with a passion that was infectious. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a man of culture and deep sentimentality. He once showed me a portrait of his late mother, a woman who looked so much like him. "She taught me that true wealth isn't in what you own, but in who you love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, a silent fraud in a room filled with genuine art and sincere memories. My heart felt like a block of ice, a stark contrast to the warmth of their home. The plan was simple: maintain the facade until the time was right to file the divorce and execute the forged documents. But the warmth of the Harringtons, their unconditional acceptance, was a variable I hadn't accounted for. They weren't the cold, arrogant elites I had imagined. They were a family, flawed and loving, just like any other. And as I watched Michael laugh with his father over a game of chess, I felt a tremor in my resolve. This wasn't a game to them. This was their life, and I was about to shatter it for a fortune that felt increasingly hollow. My nights were spent staring at the ceiling, the opulence of the master bedroom feeling less like a prize and more like a prison. The weight of my deception was growing heavier with each passing day. Michael's love was a constant, gentle current that was slowly eroding the foundation of my meticulously built defenses. He was kind, thoughtful, and genuinely believed in our shared future. He'd leave me little notes on the bathroom mirror in the mornings, praising a meal I'd cooked or a dress I'd worn. These small acts of affection were an unexpected torture, a constant reminder of the goodness I was about to betray. One evening, he came home visibly upset. His grandfather, a man I had only met a few times, was in the hospital. The family gathered, their usual composure replaced by a raw vulnerability. Mrs. Harrington held my hand, her grip tight. "He's been a rock for our family," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "He built this all from nothing." I saw the genuine fear and love in their faces, and for the first time I saw them not as a target, but as a family experiencing a deep and universal pain. The world outside, the one I had so eagerly planned to re-enter with my newfound fortune, seemed distant and insignificant. What would I do with $8 million? Buy a new life? What good was a new life if I had to abandon the most decent people I had ever known to get it? The forged documents sat in my safe, a phantom limb that I could no longer bring myself to look at. I started to wonder if the girl who had crafted this plan even existed anymore. The city lights of New York, once a beacon of my ambition, now seemed like a blinding lie. The moral ground I stood on was crumbling beneath my feet. My reflection in the ornate mirror showed a woman who looked tired, haunted. The perfection I had so carefully cultivated was fading, replaced by a deep-seated anxiety. Michael caught my gaze and came to me, his hands on my shoulders. "Are you okay, Sarah?" he asked, his voice full of concern. The lie, poised on my lips, felt too heavy to speak. I just shook my head, burying it in his chest, the warmth of his embrace both a comfort and a profound source of pain. The final act of my play was drawing near, and I was terrified of what came after the curtain fell. The day I was supposed to meet with my contact to finalize the divorce proceedings was a beautiful, clear morning. The sun shone on the Harringtons' garden, making the roses gleam with dew. But inside, I felt a storm brewing. I had the files with me, my hands clammy as I held the briefcase. This was it. The moment I had worked for, the payoff for a lifetime of feeling invisible. My heart pounded in my ears, a drumbeat of triumph and dread. As I was about to leave, Michael's father called me into his study. He sat behind his large mahogany desk, a solemn look on his face. My stomach dropped. Had he found out? Was this the end of my charade? He held up a file, a manila folder with my name on it. My mind raced, but it was too late to run. "I've had this for a while," he said, his voice quiet. I wanted to be sure. He opened the file, and I saw a picture of my childhood home, a small, dilapidated house in a forgotten corner of the city. He knew. My carefully constructed life was about to implode. He looked at me, his eyes full of a sadness I hadn't expected. "I know your story, Sarah. I know what you went through. Michael and we've been helping your family for months now, discreetly. We wanted to make sure they were taken care of. We didn't want you to feel that burden alone." He pushed the file toward me. Inside were documents showing payments for my mother's medical bills, my brother's college tuition, and a new house for them. My throat closed. They had been helping me all along, without a word, without a moment of judgment. My meticulously planned betrayal was a hollow mockery in the face of their genuine compassion. I started to cry, the tears a torrent of shame and regret. The briefcase with the forged prenup slipped from my grasp, its contents spilling onto the floor. He saw it all, the papers, the forged signatures, the full extent of my deceit. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at me, a deep disappointment etched on his face. "Why, Sarah? We would have given you anything you asked for, if you had only trusted us." His words were a dagger to my heart. Thank you for watching. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the dramatic conclusion. The silence in the study was more deafening than any shout could have been. I knelt on the floor, the forged documents a pile of my crumbled ambitions. I confessed everything, the bitterness of my past, the envy, the carefully planned deception. My voice was a broken whisper, each word a shard of glass in my throat. Mr. Harrington listened without interruption, his face a mask of sorrow. He didn't call the police. He didn't scream. He simply said, "We need to tell Michael. Together." Telling Michael was the hardest thing I had ever done. We sat in the living room, the same room where he had first introduced me to his family. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the suffocating weight of my confession. Michael listened, his face turning from a calm curiosity to a pained disbelief. His eyes, once full of a love so bright, were now pools of confusion and hurt. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a profound, aching sadness. "Sarah, why? I would have given you anything." His voice was a raw, broken plea. The image of him standing there, his heart shattering because of my actions, was a moment that would haunt me forever. He wasn't the arrogant, entitled man I had assumed he would be. He was a man who had trusted me completely, and I had repaid that trust with a lie of monstrous proportions. The family's warmth, the genuine care they had shown me, now felt like a cruel joke I had played on myself. I had tried to steal their money, but in the end, I had only stolen my own peace. Michael stood up and walked away, not in a storm of fury, but in a silent, defeated retreat. The door to his study closed with a quiet click, a final sound that sealed my fate. The opulent house, once a gilded cage of my own making, now felt like a prison. I had everything I had ever wanted, the wealth, the status, the family, but I had ruined it all with my own hands. The $8 million seemed worthless now, a cruel joke that had cost me everything that mattered. The days that followed were a cold, unbearable silence. Michael stayed in his study, emerging only to eat in a different room or to take walks in the garden, careful to avoid any place where I might be. The Harringtons were polite, but the warmth had gone out of their eyes. Their disappointment was a tangible thing, a heavy cloud that followed me through every room of the house. I was an unwanted guest in a home that had once welcomed me as a daughter. I tried to talk to Michael, to explain, to apologize, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. His silence was a more effective punishment than any words could have been. I tried to go to Mrs. Harrington, but she just shook her head, her face a mixture of sorrow and a quiet resolve. "We loved you, Sarah. We truly did. We can't pretend that this didn't happen." Their pain was a mirror, reflecting the monster I had become. The outside world, once a place I craved to conquer, now seemed terrifying. I was isolated, alone in a mansion filled with people who despised me. My phone was filled with unreturned messages from my friends, the very people who had celebrated my perfect life. I realized they were just as superficial as I had been. My carefully curated image was shattered, and no one wanted to be associated with the wreckage. I started to spend my days in the library, a quiet, dusty room filled with forgotten books. I read stories of redemption and loss, of characters who faced their demons and found a way back. But their journeys felt impossibly distant from my own. I had no one to blame but myself. My ambition, once a source of pride, now felt like a toxic force that had poisoned everything it touched. The money I had coveted, the $8 million, sat in a sealed account, a symbol of my failure. It was the key to a door I had no desire to open. One evening, as I was walking through the garden, I saw Michael sitting on a stone bench, staring at the sunset. The air was crisp, and a cold breeze rustled the leaves on the trees. I hesitated, but I knew this was my only chance. I walked towards him, my heart pounding in my chest. He didn't look up, but he knew I was there. I sat down beside him, the silence between us a living thing. "Michael," I began, my voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. For everything." He stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I know it doesn't mean anything now, but the money, the plan, it was all born from a place of hurt. I was so angry, so resentful. I wanted to prove that I was good enough, that I deserved what you had." I paused, taking a deep breath. "But you and your family, you showed me what it's like to be loved, to be trusted, and I threw it all away." He finally turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "I didn't care about the money, Sarah. My family is wealthy, yes, but we never put a price on love. We saw you, and we loved you. That's what hurts the most. That you couldn't trust us enough to be honest. That you thought you had to steal what we would have given you freely." His words were a powerful, emotional blow. I confessed my childhood, the fear of being poor, the desperate need to escape that life. He listened, his expression softening slightly. He took my hand, his touch gentle. "I understand. I really do. But forgiveness, it's something that has to be earned, Sarah. It's not something I can just give you. Not after this." He stood up and walked away, leaving me alone in the garden, the setting sun painting the sky in colors of loss and regret. The finality of his words hit me like a physical blow. The path to redemption was long and painful, and I had to walk it alone. Thanks for joining us for this emotional journey. If you want to see what happens next, be sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified when the next video is live. The following weeks were a slow, agonizing process of facing the consequences of my actions. I moved out of the Harrington estate, a symbolic act of surrender. I found a small apartment in a quiet, nondescript neighborhood, a far cry from the luxurious life I had so eagerly pursued. My life had come full circle. I was back where I started, but this time, the emptiness was of my own making. My days were filled with mundane tasks, a stark contrast to the charity galas and dinner parties. I went to the grocery store, I cooked my own meals, I did my own laundry. The simplicity of it all was both a relief and a punishment. I had traded a life of privilege for a life of quiet anonymity. I found a job as a waitress in a small cafe. The work was honest, and the people were kind. I learned to appreciate the small moments, the smile of a regular customer, the camaraderie of my coworkers, the feeling of a hard day's work. But my mind was never truly at rest. The shame of my past weighed on me. I tried to reconnect with my family, but they had their own lives now, thanks to the Harringtons' generosity. My mother's voice was warm, but there was an awkward distance in her tone. They had what they needed, and I was no longer a part of their success. My brother, now a young man in college, was polite, but his questions were superficial, avoiding the topic of my divorce. I started to go to therapy, a difficult but necessary step. My therapist helped me unpack the layers of resentment and fear that had driven me. I talked about my childhood, the feeling of being an outsider, the toxic belief that my worth was tied to my wealth. I began to understand that the $8 million I had craved was just a symbol, a way to fill an emotional void that no amount of money could ever fill. I was on a journey of self-discovery, but it was a lonely, painful road. Months turned into a year. The seasons changed, and with them, so did I. The sharp edges of my bitterness had been worn down by time and humility. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my heart, but it was no longer a consuming fire. I had learned to live with my mistakes, to accept that I had caused immense pain, and that forgiveness was a gift I might never receive. I continued to work at the cafe, saving every penny. The $8 million from the forged prenup was an albatross around my neck. I had kept it, but I never touched a cent. It was a constant reminder of my past, a monument to my greed and my failure. I knew I couldn't keep it. It was tainted money, a symbol of everything I was trying to leave behind. I decided to donate it all to charity. I researched foundations that helped families escape poverty, organizations that provided scholarships to kids who came from backgrounds like mine. It was a small act of atonement, a way to turn my greatest mistake into something good. On the day I was to transfer the money, I saw Mr. Harrington at a coffee shop near my apartment. My heart leapt into my throat. He was sitting alone, reading the newspaper. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. I approached him, my hands shaking. "Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of recognition, then a guarded silence. "I just wanted to tell you, I'm donating all the money, every penny. I know it can't fix anything, but I just wanted you to know." He looked at me for a long moment, a slow, understanding smile spreading across his face. "I know, Sarah. I've been following your progress." He put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of quiet forgiveness. He wasn't the man who had been disappointed. He was the man who had offered to help me all along. The weight of my past finally lifted. A week later, I was walking to work when I saw him. Michael. He was standing outside the cafe, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits he used to wear. My heart stopped. He looked at me, his gaze softer than I remembered, no longer filled with pain, but with a quiet understanding. "I heard about what you did, Sarah. About the donation," he said, his voice steady. "My father told me. That was a big thing to do." I just nodded, a lump in my throat. We stood there for a long time, the bustling city life around us fading into a distant hum. "I wanted to see for myself," he continued, "that the person I fell in love with, the good in her was still there. He didn't ask for a second chance. He didn't promise a future. He simply saw me, not as a villain or a victim, but as a person who had made a terrible mistake and was trying to be better. He reached out and gently took my hand, his touch a familiar grounding warmth. "It's a start," he said. And in those two simple words, a flicker of hope ignited. I didn't get back the life I had so foolishly thrown away. I didn't get the lavish parties, the luxurious cars, or the endless supply of wealth. Instead, I got something far more valuable. A clean slate. I had lost the gilded cage, but in its place, I had found freedom. I had learned that true wealth was not in the money you accumulated, but in the love you gave and the forgiveness you received. I was no longer defined by my past, but by my journey towards a better, more honest future. My story was far from a fairy tale, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly home. Thank you for watching this story. If you've enjoyed this emotional ride, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more real and compelling stories every week.